I am going to read this one. So let's start.
Oh no, what is happening?
Wait a minute. Where am I? Hi Paula, my name is Atina. I'm the goddess of wisdom, and today you are on a book of economic thinking. So we're going to study about it. Are you ready? So we're going to start with the economic thought of ancient times and the Middle Age. First of all, Greece. The Greek thinkers began their studies of the economy based on the analysis of the administration of resources, especially in the home. The economic analysis could not be very advanced due to the low complexity of the development of production and marketing. Now we are going to see some philosophers, first of all Xenophonte, who understands that the leader is the one who, using his intelligence and egoism, is capable of extracting what is required to meet the needs. On the other hand, we have Plato, which wants the correct combination of economy and government. That is why the state must regulate the market. Finally, we have Aristoteles, which thinks that the distribution must be proportionate to the capacities and merits of the people so that the people with the greatest intellectual formation are better rewarded. Now we're going to talk about a scholastic school, which ideology is a break between the thought of the Greeks and the Romans, so they try to adapt the ideas of Aristoteles with the church. They consider that the interests were usury, the exchange is the price, and you cannot get anything apart. Some authors are Alberto Magno, which condemned the monopoly for being a conspiracy to manipulate price, and Santo Tomás de Aquino, which talks about an opportunity cost that he understands is the one who made a great effort for a merchandise should have a surcharge for it. Some other authors are Enrique Primaria, who established that if the price of a product was high due to its scarcity, it should not increase when there is abundance. James Buridan, who think that the number of buyers and the purchasing power directly affect prices and the market. Nicolás de Oresme, who thinks that money has a real and unconventional value and it is made up of precious materials. And Antonio de Florencia y Bernardino de Sierra, which think that the value of a thing does not depend only in its utility. Finally, we have a Salamanca School, which professors dedicate themselves to economic thought due to the great inflation that was generated by the arrival of precious metals to Spain from the American colonies. One author is Martín de Azpilicueta, who expounded on the quantity theory of money, and Diego de Covarrubias. With this author, the ideas of this school became scholastic doctrine and part of canon law. Now we're in another age. We're going to talk about pre-classical economics. That was a fundamental point for the formation of markets and the subsequent birth of economy science. First of all, we have a capitalist mercantilism. That was a set of ideas that dominated during the time when European markets were built in their phase prior to the Industrial Revolution. The most important contribution of mercantilism to economy thought was the set of ideas that interpret the process of building markets, helping the identity of the nation and their internal strengthening. Some authors are Jean-Baptiste Colbert, which was the creator of modern accounting. He is restored to state intervention with actions against corruption, promote the construction of the necessary infrastructure for industrial development, and the protection of the internal market. Then we have Thomas Mion, which goal was the growth of national wealth, and he believed that it could be achieved by through trade. Then we have William Petty, who think that the amount of land needed to produce a person's daily food correspond to the unit of measurement of the value of work. Then we have Bernard Mandeville, who wrote The Fable of the Beast, and then he established that self-finish could produce benefits for all through unconscious cooperation. Then we have Richard Cantillon, which arguments are related to the non-intervention of the state. Finally, David Hume, one of his most important contributions is his psychological study of men's economic thought. Finally, we're going to talk about physiocracy, which was a French school that presented their ideas for a really short time, between 1750 and 1780, but gave way to the classic economies. They gave great importance to land and agriculture as way to obtain wealth, and the most important author is Francois Kiesny, that was the intellectual leader of the movement, and his theories were accepted without hesitation in practice by his comrades. Now we're going to talk about classic economic, which was a set of ideas put forward by English authors in the period from 1776, that was the date of the first classic publication of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, to the publication of John Stuart Mill Principles in 1848. The classical economists summarized and systematized the existing ideas of economic at the time, and the classical economists were the promoters of the idea of open economies and therefore of the opening of foreign trade. One of the most important economists of our time is Adam Smith, which assured that in a selfish and competitive world, the same competition ensures the improvement of the well-being of the economy. That is the theory of the invisible hand. He established three social classes: landowners, workers, and capitalists. Smith defined rent as the price paid for the use of land. Some of his ideas regarding salary and work are it depends on the pleasure of employment, the cost of learning, the eventuality of growth, the trust that must be placed in the employee, and the probability of success. Other authors are Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, who fully developed the utilitarian theory of actions to achieve the greatest number of happiness possible. For the other hand, we have Thomas Malthus, which think that the population grows faster than the food production, and he proposed as a form of birth control the increase in the death rate through wars, diseases, and hunger. Finally, we have David Ricardo, who focuses on the study of income distribution, and his book of Principle was an improvement of Smith's thinking. Now we're going to talk about neoclassical and neo-Kantian. First of all, Martinalist and neoclassical economics bases in its studies on the development of individual preference and on the subjectivity of the economy. The neoclassic proposed an income model with decreasing marginal change and constant return to scale with homogeneous capital and techniques. One of their authors is Hermann Heinrich Gaussen, who formulated two economic principles about consumption marginal utility and equimarginality, which are known as Gaussen's laws. Then we have William Stanley Jevons, who raises within his theory of value the idea that the value depends on utility. Then Leon Walras, that proposed a general equilibrium mathematical model where the market for each thing was represented by an equation of supply and demand in which the parameters were the prices to be determined by the system of equations. Then Karl Menger, who says that for an object to be called merchandise, first, that the individual has a need, and second, that this need can be satisfied by this thing. Finally, we have Alfred Marshall, which is one of his greatest contribution is the use of graphs to explain the concept of supply and demand and their partial equilibrium. About neoricardians, the term was coined to refer to the work of Piero Safra and his main followers. So Piero Safra, in his work, exposed a linear model of production in which each sector of the economy is represented by an equation. Then we have Luigi Ludovico Pasinetti, which create a parallel system to create prices of production, and he thinks that the rate of profit is determined independently of the productivity of capital. Now we're going to talk about imperfect markets and a development economy. From the crisis of the 1930s, Keynes established that the markets were not perfect. In addition, there were no automatic mechanisms that correct the recession, from which he introduced that the state was in charge of regulation in case of crisis. One of the authors is Alexander Hamilton, which free trade would not be a good stimulus for local industry and that it was necessary to protect that industry by imposing tariffs and even prohibiting imports of industrial things with high added value. Then Simon Bolivar, his task was to expand the institutions that the characterize developed market by eliminating slavery. On the other hand, we have Friedrich List, who affirmed that if a backward country applied the principles of Smith's economy, it will end up with its little industry destroyed. Antoine Augustin Cornet thinks that for the use of mathematical functions to describe economic concepts such as a supply and demand. Again, we have Piero Straffa, who thinks that the competitive market requires that there be a large number of entrepreneurs and a large number of consumers as well. And then we have Chamberlain and Robinson, who both are authors, write books about imperfect competition. Then we have John Maynard Keynes, which we have told, Paul Davidson, who proposed an international compensation system, Paolo Silos Lavini, who studied price determination in a relative concentrated oligopolistic market, Adrian Good, who was proposed to explain the determinants of the profit margin in the long term, Raoul Prebisch, who thinks that the invisible hand does not work because there are internal and external barriers that prevent it, and finally Kalecki, who proposes the state has a central role in promoting economy development. Finally, we have Kilder and Anthony P. Tirwell, who think that the country can only grow at a high rate if it promotes its exports and regulates its imports. Now we are going to talk about socialism, which implies a social and political reorganization to ensure that political power and property are effectively distributed among all. It was founded on the principle of equality. One author is Conde Saint-Simon, who thinks that private property is a source of disturbance. Charles Fourier, that believes in a system in which each individual life was to be regulated and work assigned according to talent, and Robert Owen, who believed that humanity could advance if the economy and moral conditions of individuals were improved. Finally, we have told before about Simon Bolivar and Carlos Marx, which is one of the most important authors of this school that gave importance to the proletariat. When we talk about neoliberalism, is in formulation sought to find a strategy that would allow finding new paths between liberalism and economic planning by the state. It is an economic model that was born with the principles of the Washington Consensus. These are the principles.
And that's all, Paula. What do you think? Wow, that was amazing.
I really like it, and I think we will continue in another occasion.